apparently, as we bring John McMullen in, Lane Johnson, who normally is engaging with the media, did not want to talk today after his effort against the Raiders. Johnny Mac, what's going on with Lane Johnson, and why is he taking it out on that pretty girl reporter?
I don't know, to be honest. Lane kind of said some things after the game that were typical Lane. Lane is very accommodating, usual to the media, and that was the case after the win over Oakland, which was obviously an ugly win. And he said some typical Lane Johnson things with some things I can't say on the radio sprinkled in about the referees, about people doubting this team, which is 13-2, and about Khalil Mack as well. And he said print it, and many of us did print it in the papers and on the web. And I don't know exactly what Lane is upset about, whether the fact that he criticized the officials, which obviously you can be fined for in this league, or I get the feeling more than that it was some of the boos. There were significant boos at Lincoln Financial Field during that game. And I even tweeted about it myself because I was kind of stunned. I realized they were in the midst of a terrible game. But again, this is at the time a 12-2 team that was, circling in on the number one seed in the NFC. And it's interesting to see how expectations change so swiftly. And the reality is there's a lot of people in this city and even more people nationally who think this team no longer has a chance because Carson Wentz is out of the picture. And from the players' perspective, they're 13-2, and the only thing that stands between them in the Super Bowl is 2 home games, really 3 if you want to count the Cowboys game, which doesn't count. They don't have to leave South Philadelphia again. So I think Lane's a little ornery about that as well.
So his quote was that I'm done talking for the year. Now, of course, next week is the new year. So then he had to throw in maybe for the rest of my career. Do you think that really, you think that's really the case, or knowing Lane, do you think that he's not going to be able to help himself, just like Ric Flair?
Yeah, I said on 973ESPN.com, I have it between 24 hours. I wouldn't be surprised if he talks tomorrow in about a week or so, as you mentioned, when the new year kicks in. Lane is too good of a guy. I don't think this stands up. I think he's just frustrated for whatever reason. And now we can only speculate on that reason because he didn't explain it. So if he explained his frustrations, we would know. But yeah, I don't think he's not going to talk for the rest of his career. That's just not in Lane's nature.
Before I move on from Lane Johnson, did you think they were legitimate holding calls?
It's interesting. I think from Lane's perspective, Khalil Mack got some reputation calls, and they were certainly borderline. There's a lot of things that can be called holding in this league, and that's one of the frustrations of not only players but fans who watch the games and the inconsistency of the calls. But Doug Peterson said they were fine, and you kind of move on, and they're not upset about them. So, hey, they're holds because they called them, basically. And I've always sort of embarked the serenity defense when it comes to officiating. There's nothing you can do about it, so there's no use complaining about it.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insiders. We're on a Wednesday at the NovaCare, and one of the storylines, I guess, today, John, would be that it was a walkthrough today instead of a full-scale practice. Do you like the way that Doug is managing things as we get to this point of the season?
Yeah, we'll see how it works out in the end. I think it's interesting because of the struggles of the offense against the Raiders, who aren't obviously a very good defense. And you do have the drastic change at the quarterback position, and there are at least some chemistry issues you need to work out. So you can see from that side of the football, they probably could use a little bit more practice. From the other side of the football defensively, I think it's the exact opposite. So you do need to sort of manage them as you get down the stretch. And so it's a tough sort of juggling act for Doug Peterson right now. And it's why he's in the conversation for Coach of the Year. This team, as I said, you can't say it enough. They're an NFL best 13-2. If they beat Dallas, this team's never won 14 games before, and they've been around for a long time. Obviously, they haven't played 16 games for that long, but this is 60 minutes away, this team, from being the best regular season team in Philadelphia history. So that's pretty good. And Doug's pushed all the right buttons to this point. We'll see if he gets this one right.
John, as you look ahead to Sunday against the Cowboys, a lot of people want to know, is Nick Foles going to play? And if he does, how long will he play? I am personally of the belief I think he needs some more game reps. I think this offense in general needs it all together too. But what do you think? How do you think Doug will handle that? I know he's, not really said specifically yet what his intentions are.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to play. It's just a matter of how much he's going to play, even though Doug hasn't officially said that. You need – I think people kind of forget this is not the same as preseason from a roster standpoint. You don't got 75, and this year it's all 90. You don't have all those players in uniform. So just from a mathematical standpoint, some guys have to play. And that's the reality of an NFL regular season roster, which is 53, and then it gets scaled back to 46 on game day. You don't have to go back very far. You can go back to the Dallas Cowboys last season when they were coming in here, and they had everything wrapped up. And you remember they scaled things back, and it was Tony Romo's last game. But certain guys had to play for a little bit. So at the bare minimum, certain players and even star players are going to have to be on the field for a time. But, yeah, I'm with you, Scott. I mean, we saw Nick Foles, and there's no way to sort of put lipstick on that pig. It was a bad performance. Part of it had to do, I think, with the weather. I think that's legitimate. And the wind was gusting up to 20 miles per hour. And you can look at Derek Carr and say he didn't do anything getting the football outside either. So it was a difficult environment from that standpoint. But even in the Giants game, you saw some double clutching and uncertainty from Nick Foles in certain aspects, and that's because he hasn't played a lot. So I think the more comfortable he gets, the better it gets for him.
Now, we know we will see Nate Sudfeld at some point. He's just one play away from actually being the guy to try to take this team to a Super Bowl now. What can you tell fans to look for out of Nate Sudfeld? I mean, let's just go there. What do you think we'll see out of him? What will stand out?
I could tell the fans to look for it, not Nate Sudfeld. If Nate Sudfeld's on the field, you're done. It's as simple as that. And I'm not trying to criticize Nate Sudfeld, but if you're down to your third quarterback in the NFL, I mean, there's not much you can do. And from the standpoint, you're right, he's one play away. And I understand the people want to put Nick Foles in bubble wrap, but I always say you can't legislate injuries in this league. You can't coach scared. He needs reps. You have to move forward, and that has to be your mentality of getting him prepared as much as you can for significant games. But what I just talked about, the rest in the Dallas Cowboys, you can look back to the Oakland Raiders of last season, who went from literally the number 2 seed to the number 5 seed when Derek Carr got hurt. Then Matt McGloin gets hurt, and they have to play Connor Cook in Week 17 for 3 quarters and in the playoff game, and they were done. And because they were down to the third quarterback. And the Eagles would be in the same scenario. So you just hope it doesn't come to that.
when you look at this team, you got guys like LeGarrette Blount, who's not getting a lot of carries. You got guys like Alshon Jeffrey, who didn't even get targeted, I believe, on Monday night. But these guys aren't complaining. They seem to be getting in line. What can you say? I know winning heals everything, but what can you kind of point to as saying why these guys who have been workhorses in the past with other teams are not raising a stir?
Well, I think part of it is, most of it is what you just said, is winning. The fact that they're 13-2. If they were 2-13, it would be a much different sort of narrative around guys not getting the football. It's hard to complain. And look, Garrett says that flat out. He says it all the time. Look, you can't complain if you're winning. If you do that, you just look like a you-know-what. So I think every skill position player wants the football. But the reality is, if you keep winning games, there's nothing to complain about. And Alshon Jeffrey, so he was targeted twice, but he didn't catch any footballs. And that's the first time he got shut out since his rookie season when he was a part-time player in Chicago. And he left the locker room early, so a lot of people were speculating if he was upset. But he talked today, and he said he wasn't frustrated, just had something to do. Remember, it was Christmas night, so people did want to get out and want to be with their family or loved ones or what have you. So I think the Eagles' offense as a whole was frustrated about their performance, but I don't think it had much to do with the divvying up of touches. It was more of the 1 of 14 on third downs, and they couldn't stay on the football field, which in turn limits your touches because you don't have as many opportunities because you're not sustaining drives.
John, my first chance to talk to you since the Eagles-the Raiders game, and I'm just curious what you attributed the lack of production for the wideout position to. Is that how poorly Nick Foles played? Scott has a interesting theory where he started to roll out today where he thinks the Eagles as a staff are trying not to reveal much of their game plan moving forward. Don't put anything on tape for somebody else to see. A lot of options out there for why the offense looked the way it looked on Monday night.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the weather. I really do. Obviously, the wind chill was in the teens, and as I said, it was gusting pretty heavily, and nobody wants to use that excuse. But the reality is, you can look at Minnesota two days earlier playing in Green Bay, where it was even worse. It was 5 degrees, and if you watch that game, they left a lot on the field. Typically, plays they make down the field were just to tick off, and that's what happens in bad weather. And I said, you can criticize Nick Foles all you want. The quarterback on the other side makes $25 million a year, and he couldn't get the ball outside the numbers. And that kind of thing happens in bad weather. You're not going to have these clean 40-point games. But the good news is each team has to play in it. And in theory, the Eagles have an advantage, and it turns out they did have an advantage. While they make the 48-yard field goal, the Raiders miss the 48-yard field goal. And even though the Raiders got great field position the entire second half, they kept turning the football over. And in theory, that's the kind of advantage you're going to have in the postseason. And it might be an ugly win, but hey, style points don't count this time of the year.
Before I forget, we had a caller earlier that brought up the fact that they were running the ball and running it effectively on the second series, and it was working on the ground. Why did they get away from that? And then he also added he'd like to see Ajayi get 20-plus carries in a game. And Scott and I both kind of shook our heads like, I'd like to have $1 million, but there's no chance that's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, do you envision a scenario where an Eagles running back gets 20-plus carries?
No, not this season. I mean, if you see Ajayi, you can say, and you look at his numbers and you say, I think he's at 5.8 yards a carry since he's come from Miami. He also keeps fumbling the football at the end of good runs. I mean, that affects it. and that affects his playing time. But I think the mentality of Philadelphia as a whole, as a fan base, and I talk about it all the time, they're kind of like stuck in the 1970s. That's not today's NFL, where you sit back in an I formation and give somebody the football 25 times. Nick Foles talked about it last week before the bad game. And he said everything in today's NFL is out of the gun, meaning everybody's in the pistol or shotgun formation. They're running the offset looks. The Eagles run the football more than most teams, and they run it more effectively than most teams. You have to realize the game has changed, and it's not coming back to what it was. So people have to get over that.
John McMullen with us. He's brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Geno Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at genopinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. John, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, also covers the league nationally, and some good national stories today, John, including James Harrison signing with the Patriots. And now there's word, of course, he wanted out. He left us. What's your read on this James Harrison move as he goes to New England?
Well, I think it's a little bit overblown. Obviously, he's a former star player, but the guy going to New England isn't the defensive player of the year as James Harrison once was. Now, obviously, when you have somebody who sort of did so much in one organization and leaves for a rival, and they could be playing for the AFC Championship in a few weeks, it tends to be a big deal. But I think the name James Harrison has got people thinking the old James Harrison is going to the New England Patriots at the worst possible time. Well, ask yourself, if that were the case, why would the Pittsburgh Steelers cut James Harrison? This is not an impactful player at this stage of his career. They didn't have to cut him. The reality is anybody on the street right now is not a superstar. So I think the name and that he was a former superstar is kind of driving that story.
John, any sense of, I mean, this to me sounds like it's a Bill Belichick type move where, look, we're probably guaranteed to play the Steelers in the AFC Championship game. Is Harrison brought in basically as an advanced scout just to help them start and be able to give his knowledge more than anything he's going to contribute on the field?
No, and that I always kind of, people say that all the time. I heard Eagles fans when the Saints signed Dexter McDougal for a week, like they're going to go, like he's going to learn all of Jim Schwartz's intricacies. Bill Belichick knows more about the Pittsburgh Steelers than James Harrison does. Trust me, he doesn't need James Harrison to tell him what the Pittsburgh Steelers are trying to accomplish. And that goes on the other side. I mean, that's what coaches do. They watch film. So that kind of stuff, when a player leaves one organization, goes to another, that's always a little bit overrated.
John, this headline made me laugh. The Jaguars announced that they have a sellout of their wild card tickets. That's not something that would be an issue in South Philadelphia.
No, but I'll tell you, hey, you know what? I tweeted it during the game, and I'm going to bring it up, and people are going to. There were a lot of empty seats there on Christmas night in the upper two levels in the second half. Now, I don't know if people just went to the concourse to try to warm up or they left early. I know there was a report from 6 ABC in Philadelphia that people were leaving early. And it was Christmas night, and you can put all that into the equation. But I'll just say it stunned me. I was surprised by that.
They probably all went to Xfinity Live. That's where my friends went. I know I was getting text messages. It was very enjoyable to watch that game, John, in my pajamas and not freezing my tuchus off in one of those upper or lower levels. One more national question is the Giants quarterback, as the world turns, as the QB turns, Davis Webb is moving from third string to second string. Geno Smith, thanks for playing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. To be honest, Davis Webb should have been playing for a couple of weeks now, really, because obviously Geno Smith's not the future. Eli Manning is not going to be I'm not going to say he's not going to be with the Giants, but they certainly have to start looking for the heir apparent. And whether that turns out being Davis Webb, I doubt, but you have to take a look. And obviously, they're going to have likely the second pick in the draft, perhaps, so they can go out and get a quarterback, whether it's going to be Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen. Ultimately, I think they probably are able to get one of those players in the draft. So the future has already started for the New York Giants, whether they know it or not. So you got to get a look at these young players and see if they have anything.
John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, covers the league nationally as well. Good follow on Twitter, at JF McMullen. I follow him. I urge you to do the same, as he will continue to report for us. Tomorrow we'll catch up with you again at the same time. Nick Foles at 12:15, the walkthrough. So another walkthrough tomorrow is what practice is, and then open locker room after that. So we'll see what comments come out of the NovaCare complex tomorrow and get it all from our man, Johnny Mack. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.